Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the future of biofuels. This is a webinar which is part of an insight briefing webinar series of the Getting to Zero Coalition. My name is Randall Krantz with the Global Maritime Forum, and I've been working with the Fuels and Technologies workstream for the past 2 years. And as part of this series, we've been exploring a range of different topics, a range of different fuels, and a range of different technologies that are all related to shipping, the technologies and fuels that are going to get us towards zero emission vessels. So in today's webinar, we're going to be exploring the role of biofuels. We know that biofuels are going to have a key role in the transition. It's not entirely clear, and we're going to be exploring a lot of that in our webinar today, the role of biofuels in a post-2030 situation. And so what is going to be the share of shipping fuel that might be biofuel? What are the amounts that are going to be available based on scalability, based on the competitiveness, based on other industry demands, and based on the sustainability? And what are the potential volumes and supplies relative to the non-bio zero carbon fuel options? So we're going to be kind of looking at that. Obviously, there's going to be some key questions around sustainability criteria. What does that look like? Certification. We're going to try to explore some angles around some of the blends and some of the other different intricacies of biofuels. So looking forward to an active conversation today. Throughout the conversation, you can participate by using the chat function. So please put your questions into the chat. When you do so, please be sure that you're asking your questions to the panelists and the attendees. That helps everybody else see the questions. We will do our best to repeat the questions as they come in, but it just makes everybody's life a little bit easier if they can follow along, and feel free to engage in the conversation there. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have 4 panelists. These are Carolina Grassi, the Business Development Lead for Latin America from the Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials. Berit Hinnemann, Head of Decarbonization Business Development at Maersk. Johannes Schurmann, Innovation Manager from Goodfuels. Anne-Sophie Vinther Hansen, Investment Manager from the Danish Sovereign Fund. And so welcome to each of our panelists, and thank you very much for joining us today. And what we'll do is we're going to open up this session with each of our panelists providing some opening remarks. They each have a couple of slides to share, and so we're going to get a few different perspectives. We'll run through those, and then we'll open up for broader questions for people to pop into the chat, and I'll kind of be cross-examining a little bit with some questions of my own. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Carolina, then Berit, then Johannes, then Anne-Sophie. So Carolina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So just 1 second, I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So hello and good day to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the Getting to Zero Coalition for the opportunity to join this webinar and discuss such an important topic. So my name is Carolina Grassi, and I work at the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. And I will first give you a short background on RSB, and then look at the key sustainability risks of biofuels and how to overcome them. So RSB is a global non-profit sustainability organization, and together with our multi-stakeholder membership, our mission is to create a just transition to a net positive world. And based on strong framework on sustainability, RSB creates impact in 3 different ways. So first, we offer a sustainability certification to fuel producers and users. Second, we work on projects and programs around the world to unlock regional potential for sustainable production of feedstocks and biofuels. And finally, our membership community is a place to develop new knowledges and solutions on challenges facing industry. And why sustainability is so important in the biofuels production? Of course, biofuels can be a strategic avenue to mitigate climate crisis, but there are social and environmental risks from deforestation, food insecurity, land grabs, and more that can cause huge problems for business and brand and must be managed. So I listed here a few of key sustainability risks which should be considering in the biofuels production. So the first one is the biomass competition between markets. The availability of biomass could be an issue, and that is why biomass need to look beyond the biofuels need to look beyond the biomass, and also considering the use of waste and residues, as well as innovative solutions such as Power to X. The second one is the GHG emission. Biofuels do not automatically have a lower GHG footprint than fossil fuels on their life cycle, especially if growing biomass requires land use change. So it's so important to perform a life cycle assessment of carbon. The land use and labor rights. Instead of be a risk, we want to see the biofuels straining the regional communities and make them more economically resilient. The other one is the traceability and the transparency of supply chain. With increased demand on biofuels come increased risk of fraud. So being able to trace fuels back to their origin is absolutely vital. And deforestation is perhaps the risk most associated with biofuels production, and for good reason. The growth in demand for feedstocks has the potential to cause devastations to ecosystems. Another one, an important one, is direct land use change. It occurs when cropland is converted to biofuel feedstock production, and so a natural land should be converted to maintain agricultural production levels. And the last one is food security. It's another key issue with growing population in many regions requiring agricultural land to feed them and competing with feedstocks for biofuels. So I've told you of the challenge, but of course, biofuels can be sustainable, and RSB can guarantee the sustainability of biofuels. We have the 12 RSB principles and criteria for sustainability that were developed together with more than 300 organizations and can guide the development of truly sustainability of biofuels. And alongside the use of low ILUC risk model, RSB certification for biofuels is able to demonstrate clearly how to your customers and civil society, how biofuels can be produced in sustainable way and achieve real climate benefits, while not contributing for negative impact on society and environment. And the last slide is I'd like to show here is that RSB works with different sectors, including shipping. That is the main point of this discussion also. And RSB has worked for many years with the aviation sector. And here you can see our impact, our global impact in aviation sector. So we work with manufacturers, fuel producers, end user, and civil society. And we enjoy a high level of support and recognition from the aviation sector. So we already have a robust framework and landscape project developed for the aviation sector that could be easily replicated for the shipping sector, such as activities of feedstock assessment or national roadmap for biofuels. So this is my presentation and my briefing, and I really hope this short session could support you to take vital steps towards the sustainability. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolina. And I already see that there's a comment in the chat there. Somebody's looking at, has a question around LCA assessment and how those can be comparable. And it sounds to me that if you're going to take that system, so you're making sure that you can compare LCAs is going to be very important. Do you have a quick answer for that?
Yes, sure. I agree. It's very important to have robust methodologies to have LCA comparable. So what we have, for instance, in RSB, we have a JD tool that encompasses different methodologies that is recognized for legislations and regulations such as CORSIA, schemes for aviation, or URED. And I think that if you have a good methodology and a robust methodology that could be applied for different biofuels and different feedstock producers, I think in this way the LCA could be comparable and is robust and is trustable.
Great, thank you. I'm sure there's other questions. I have some of my own that we'll come back to. And one, you mentioned the aviation sector. There's a lot of room for learning, but there's also the questions around competition. So I'm sure we'll come back to that one. Next, I'd like to call on Berit, Head of Decarbonization Business Development at Maersk. Berit, Maersk has been in the news a lot. There's over the last week, which is really exciting. Some of that is directly related to biofuels, but there's also kind of an indirect angle at that as well that I'm sure that we'll touch on in terms of kind of bio-derived carbon and other fuels. So maybe first over to you to provide a more general view.
Yes, thank you very much. Is my screen visible?
It is.
Okay, very good. So what I would like to do, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to be part of this panel and to have this interesting discussion. I mean, this is very much appreciated. I would like to give a brief overview about our decarbonization activities at Maersk. And just to set the scene, we see it as a strategic imperative to decarbonize global supply chains to be able to offer these solutions to our customers, but it is also expected from the world around us. So we see the need to decarbonize our operations as fast as possible, and this is what we are working on. To give you a sort of impression of the magnitude, here you see our CO2 footprint in 2020, where we actually have 33.9 million tons of CO2 emissions per year, which come from the container ships as our scope 1 emissions. And then we also have small amount of scope 2 emissions, and then scope 3, the emissions from the value chain. And I will be speaking about the what we do to decarbonize our container ship operations. We have been working for a number of years on energy efficiency measures, and that continues to be important. But of course, in order to really reach our goal of net zero operations in 2050, we also need to transition to different fuels. And just to give you a very short impression of what we're doing here, and I'm sure we'll discuss that in more detail also, is when we move from fossil feedstocks to renewable feedstocks, that can be biomass feedstock, renewable electricity, or a combination of both. And what we are doing here is we are working with sort of 4 overall pathways. We are already using biodiesel today in our fleet. We are also looking into advanced biofuels, but we do recognize also the scalability and availability issues that has also been mentioned by Carolina already. We are working with methanol, where we are looking at both biomethanol and e-methanol. I mean, we see as e-methanol as the more scalable option in the long term, but in the short and medium term, we see the need for both. Then we also work with alcohol lignin blends, which is on an R&D stage, but we also see interesting possibilities in that. And we are also working on ammonia, on green ammonia, but here we have some more work to do to make that actually feasible for container shipping operations before it is a solution that we can pursue. Just to conclude my remarks, I'd like to touch upon very recent developments also. We announced in the spring that we will build the first carbon neutral container ship with start of operations in 2023. And recently we've also announced more details about the yard, the trading route. The ship will trade in Europe, and also about the fuel supply, which will be e-methanol supplied by Reintegrated European Energy, whom we have announced a partnership with. In addition to that, we have also last week announced 8 ocean-going carbon neutral container vessels, which are for dual fuel operations for VLSFO and green methanol. And the first vessel will go into operation in Q1 2024. And the key challenge will be to source the green fuels for these vessels, no doubt. But we believe that this will kickstart also fuel production projects because there is a real demand now from these ships, and we are really looking forward to enable that these projects materialize and that we can source the fuel for the ships and decarbonize. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the further discussion.
Thank you very much, Berit. And the slides that you showed were very useful and helpful. It was interesting to see where you showed your kind of 4 major fuel options that you're looking at: biodiesel, methanol, lignin fuels, and ammonia. 3 of those 4 are either primarily or potentially very heavily bio-based. Obviously, ammonia is a different beast. And you also used the word combination. Is it possible to combine those fuels in different ways? How does that work in terms of either directly combining within the vessel on a single voyage, or the aspect of a dual fuel vessel, what it can run on, just so that the audience kind of understands how specific are these ship designs?
Yeah, and these ship designs, the methanol ships, they will be dual fuel. That means, I mean, we do intend to run them on green methanol, but if that for some reason is not possible, they can run on VLSFO. They will need a certain amount of biodiesel as pilot fuel, as ignition fuels. They are not directly compatible or anything with ammonia. I mean, that would require different kind of technologies on the ship. The engine development for ammonia, I mean, as is well known, is also not finished yet. The issue for biodiesel as pilot fuels, that will also be the case for ammonia. For ammonia, we do not know yet how much pilot fuel will be needed. But so that's. But what we do really see is that there's no silver bullet solution as such. I mean, we believe that there may be a future where different solutions exist alongside each other. And therefore, that is also the reason why we pursue several pathways.
Okay, thank you. And there's one simple question. Somebody says 8 large container vessels. How much of your fleet is that actually covering?
I mean, we have 700 container vessels, so that is that gives an impression. I mean, once these ships, these 8 ships, are in operation and all of them running on green methanol, they would displace about 1 million tons of CO2. We think this is a significant step. I mean, I showed that the CO2 footprint scope 1 was 33 million tons of CO2. So you can say 1 down, 32 to go. So we think that this is a significant step in the right direction.
It certainly is a significant step. Thank you. There's a question about the sourcing of biofuels, but rather than let you answer that, I'm actually going to let Johannes answer that, because I'm sure that that is part of his presentation that he's going to give us now. So Johannes Schurmann, over to you from Goodfuels to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing to help ensure the sustainability of that supply.
Thank you, Randall. Let me share my screen. I think you can see it now, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the invitation that we can speak here. My name is Johannes Schurmann, Innovation Manager at Goodfuels. Let me skip to the next slide. So Goodfuels was founded in 2015 as a marine biofuel supplier and developer. So back in 2015, we already started supplying biofuels to our customers. As you can see here in the timeline, over the years, we had a lot of breakthroughs, but I would highlight some, and that is in November 2018, we were the first company globally launching a bio-residual fuel oil to the shipping sector. This fuel can be used in a 100% form in the diesel engines that the vessels are already running on. So to come back to the question of Randall, where the fuel comes from, we as Goodfuels, we already supply biofuels to the shipping sector for a couple of years now. This fuel is mainly supplied in the Northwestern European region, but at the beginning of this year, we also had the first biofuel bunker in Singapore. So with that, we showed that we can also go global with this biofuel supply, and that other regions can also start supplying biofuels to the shipping sector. So why did we choose biofuels at Goodfuels? The main reason for that is that we want to offer a solution to our customers already right now. A lot can be done, but by implementing biofuels right now, you can, as you can see in this picture, already reduce up to 90% CO2. So biofuels, what about it? For us, it is important that the fuel is sustainable. It needs to come from a sustainable feedstock like, for example, use cooking oil or any other sustainable feedstock. It needs to work. So it needs to work in the engine. At the moment, we need to have a drop-in fuel, so a fuel that can directly be used in a ship. It needs to be affordable. So it needs, if you, for example, look at hydrogen at the moment, that's super expensive compared to the fossil fuels that they're already using. So at the moment, we need to supply a fuel that can be affordable for our customers. It needs to be available. So it needs to be, we need to supply it right now. It's not that we can develop a fuel, just like Berit mentioned, that we start with ammonia because there's no demand for it. There is no sustainable ammonia available, as far as I know. So we need to have a fuel that is currently available, and it needs to be scalable. And of course, the question is whether UCO-based fuels are scalable enough. That might be not the case, or that is even not the case. So at Goodfuels, we are looking at more options. Here you can see some of our customers. I won't go too deep into that, but these are some of the front-running companies already sailing on biofuels for part of their fleet. Over here you see our product portfolio. We have multiple products in our portfolio, and the main reason for that is that we also agree that there's no silver bullet for the shipping sector, and also not for those biofuels. Each different vessel might need slightly other fuel. So we have this bioresidual fuel, we have biodiesels, we have HVOs, we have fuels with different pour points. So basically on the needs of our customers, we design a fuel and supply a fuel to them that works. How do we want to move forward? As I mentioned, we don't see an endlessly availability of UCO and tallow-based fuels, and therefore we are in a lot of research projects developing, for example, lignin fuels. Those fuels convert solid biomass into a liquid fuel, and we see that those feedstocks are much more scalable than the oil feedstocks like UCO and tallow, and therefore we are in these innovation projects as a Goodfuels. I think that was a comprehensive presentation of Goodfuels.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Definitely lots going on, and it's great to hear that you guys are getting the vessels, getting the fuels in the ships and on the water right now. There's a lot of learning that needs to take place, both in terms of how the fuels actually burn in the vessels and how they work and how they operate, what that means for maintenance, because even if the fuel's fully compatible, that doesn't mean that we know all of those eventualities yet, but also it helps us get to scale on that supply side. One question I would have would be, when you look at the lignin fuels, there's a lot of potential for scalability there, but just orders of magnitude. I mean, for the shipping industry, is there enough biofuel to go around? What percentage of the industry could be powered by biofuel at some stage, do you think?
That's a good question, and that is quite hard to answer. And that is the reason for that is that, of course, we have competitive sectors, not only the transport sector, and then I'm talking about aviation, but we have also the chemical industry sector that is also in need for biomass to be converted in biochemicals. So it's really hard where you want to allocate the biomass on. For the upcoming years, I would say, the upcoming decades even, I would say that there's more than enough sustainable biomass available to at least start the transition. And at some point, when there's enough green electricity, we need to move to e-fuels and fuels like that. But at least for the upcoming decades, there is enough sustainable biomass, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, great. And there's a question that's come in asking about the life cycle of biofuels, and that there's the potential for dilution of the actual decarbonization of biofuels across that life cycle. And how do you track that, and what does that actually come to in terms of actual sustainability numbers in terms of decarbonization? And obviously that'll be different now to in the future when the rest of the value chain might be more decarbonized.
Yeah, so at the moment we work with certification schemes that are RD compliant. One of them is, for example, ICC. And that system allows us to trace basically back or at least take in consideration the whole greenhouse gas intensity of our products. So at Goodfuels, we only work with products that have such a certification. Of course, the CO2 reduction is not 100%, and that is due to the conversion, transportation of the products, cultivation. And so, yeah, there are carbon intensities in our products right now, so it's not a solution to fully decarbonize the shipping sector, but it is definitely a good start to use biofuels.
Great, thank you, Johannes. There's lots of other questions that are coming in, and we'll come back to some of those, but finally I'd like to turn to Anne-Sophie Vinther, our final speaker for this. So Anne-Sophie, from an investor perspective, obviously, none of this is going to work if there's not the investment behind it, and maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what you're doing to make that happen.
Absolutely. Let me just share my screen. So I am with Vækstfonden, which means the Growth Fund in Danish, and we are the Danish Sovereign Investment Fund. So being the Danish state's investment funds, our motive is to put things into motion and put people to work. We are a regional fund, and you'll find that many investment funds have a regional scope. Ours is Denmark, Faroe Islands, and Greenland. And we work to discover and develop companies that Denmark cannot afford to miss out on, ideally with a global scale. We work from very early stage, investments of maybe 100,000 euros and up to 15 million approximately euros on single investments. And we have many different mandates. I have around 300 colleagues. And I work specifically with our green mandate. So long story short, in 2050, we expect to be around 10 billion people on the planet. We'll have around 60% of the population in cities, and we'll also have an increase in our materials productions, our food productions, our global freight, and everything else. This presents some planetary challenges. And part of that is global warming, but also biodiversity crisis and increasing amounts of non-recyclable materials piling up around and so on. And we see a stark demand for change from consumers, from authorities, and from other types of stakeholders. For this reason, the Danish government has decided to pitch in to solve this solution. By allocating 25 billion Danish kroner, so that's around 3.5 billion euros, for green investments that will assist in the green transition in different sectors. And this graph is specific to what's happening in Denmark, but if you look into other countries around Europe and the world, you will find something similar. You have some grants and soft funding on the left there. And our job as Vækstfonden and Danmarks Grønne Investment Fund is to accelerate and help these companies scale and expand to the point that they can start selling their products or services globally. And we have put quite a lot of work into identifying which areas we believe will have the largest effect on concentrating our investments in. And these are energy, transport, food, material and resources, and agri-tech and agri-food. So for anyone listening that wants to scale a fantastic new green technology, if it is going to be operating in Denmark, then feel free to reach out. And if it's operable somewhere else, then find the similar version of Vækstfonden in your respective country, or a large international investor that might be interested. That was the short introduction from me.
Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie, and certainly I'm sure that there are some on the call that are pleased to hear that there are funders that are looking for the investments that are going to make this happen. And I think that the role of innovation funds and the role of pension funds is really a critical one in helping this get to scale. And certainly 25 billion kroner is not a trifle amount of investment. It's a very serious investment, and it's the scales that we're going to be needing from all or certainly most countries of the world to be able to make this happen. So a few questions have been coming into the chat, but I think one of them that I'd like to explore a little bit is just kind of, you know, the whole scalability. And somebody came in with a question around the IEA, who in their report that was released earlier this year had some controversy around the role of biofuels, and they said that come 2015, even 2070, biofuels would be potentially the second largest source of alternative fuels after ammonia for the shipping sector. I'm going to start with you, Carolina, because you're looking, I would say, what you bring to the table is something that enables, but also something that restricts the potential supply. Because if we look at the key criteria that you listed there, that can rule out a lot of potential biofuels or a lot of potential sources. Do you think that the biofuels could be the second largest source of alternative fuels for the industry in 30 plus years time?
Thank you, Randall, for the questions. And I think it's difficult to say. However, I believe that both biofuels and ammonia has the potential to attend and supply the shipping sector. And because what I think about that, to be feasible, it should attend three main pillars. That should be technical feasibility, that should have technical feasibility, economic feasibility, and should be, of course, meet the and avoid social impact. I mean, should be sustainable. So I think it's possible, and I think we have all the conditions and technical conditions to replace fossil fuels with biofuels and ammonia. And I believe that ammonia has a great potential for shipping, considering the infrastructure and the demand from the sector. But I don't think so. I don't know and I don't know how to say if it's realistic or not realistic. I think it's plausible, but it's hard to say that it will happen.
That's very fair. Berit, from Maersk's perspective, obviously you're investing broad spectrum in a range of different bio solutions and solutions that have part bio components, because even e-methanol in the near future is likely to have a carbon atom. My understanding is often from a bio-derived source would be kind of one of the next steps there. How does Maersk view biofuels in the transition phase, say in the next 10, 20 years, versus in the post-transition phase when we're looking at kind of scalability? Is Maersk looking at these in terms of both of those, or kind of more in terms of the form of the transition and what that means?
Yes. First of all, I would like to point out that the reason is that we are pursuing several solutions is that I think there will be a place for several solutions. I mean, biofuels, we will need them, especially short and medium term. But in the long term, we have to see what the situation will be like in terms of also biomass availability, competition with other sectors, and access to sustainable biofuels, as has all been mentioned. Regarding from the feedstock side and from the production side, we recognize why green ammonia is so attractive, because it does not contain carbon and it does not require any carbon-based feedstock. There are still technical and safety problems to solve. We are also optimistic that those can be solved. We have to await what the solution then will look like. Also, whether green ammonia is something that can be used in every port all over the world, some places or so. These are issues that we simply do not know yet, and we need to get a little bit further ahead. The reason why we are moving ahead with methanol is also because we think also in this decade we need to start to act and reduce our CO2 emissions. You're right, in terms of methanol, also in the form of e-methanol in the near future, it will require a biogenic point source. From our analysis and conversations, I mean, we understand that they are available, but we are also very aware that there will be also competition for those in the future. So this is why we need to explore all the avenues that are that are feasible from technical, economic, and also sustainability point of view, and we'll have to see what the roles of biofuel will be in this going forward.
And you mentioned the role of competition, which obviously provides a lot of open-ended questions, probably more questions than answers. Now, shipping fuels have been generally less regulated and more polluting, less taxed, and across all of these things have therefore been cheaper for the industry for the past 100 years compared to most other fuels. How do you think that will influence shipping's ability to be competing with other sectors? Maybe starting with Berit and then Johannes to you in terms of kind of what that looks like across, in particular, aviation, but also others.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a point here, and we have also been vocal in the sense that we need regulations to ensure a level playing field, and we think that this is very important. On the shorter term, I mean, we have already an eco-delivery carbon neutral shipping product. So we find that some customers value carbon neutral shipping, and that allows us, and this customer interest and customer support allows us to get started and to take these steps. But we need regulations to ensure a level playing field for those fuels across the industry.
Great, thanks to you, Berit. Johannes, your perspective on how this might play out across different industries in terms of competition.
Yeah, so yeah, I fully agree with Berit there that we need a level playing field. At Goodfuels, we also do have a decarbonization program for cargo owners, and basically this program pays for the price premium of the current more expensive biofuels compared to fossil fuels. That at the moment we are somewhat creative by letting the cargo owners pay for the price premium, and therefore the vessel owners can actually sell for almost or fossil price or almost fossil prices on these sustainable biofuels. So at the moment we are somewhat creative. We are still only supplying these, or mainly supplying these fuels in Northwestern Europe, and that's because there are some incentives here that at least for the next couple of years guarantee that we can provide these fuels at prices comparable to fossil prices. But at some point we need other regions in the world also to at least set a target for sustainable fuels, so that companies like us can make investments to reduce the cost of biofuels, knowing that there is a demand for the fuels that we will produce at some point.
Excellent. And you said making the investments to reduce the cost of biofuels. Anne-Sophie, and the investments that you are making, how are these spread across different industries? Presumably shipping is one of the areas that stands to gain from this, but are you looking at other sectors as well? And how do you balance your investments across those sectors?
Absolutely, we're looking at many different sectors, and we're taking a value chain perspective rather than a final end user perspective in our investments. So a company that might be able to produce an energy product or a fuel product for multiple sectors is likely going to have an easier time scaling internationally than someone who makes a single product, for instance. We try to balance our portfolio based on well, a healthy bottom line is of course important, but also on people, a planet, environment, and lots of other metrics as well to try to optimize the effect that our investments will have in the end. We also spend quite a lot of time trying to work through value chain with our portfolio companies to make sure that they accelerate and meet the markets that they intend to meet. I forget the last part of your question, I think.
Well, it was more just kind of looking across the different sectors and how you were distributing your investment between different competing sectors for biofuels.
So our main sectors that we focus on for these green investments specifically are energy and the agri-food sector. Energy is a big part, but we're not specifying that 15% of that should be aviation and 50% should be shipping. Rather, we're looking from the perspective of the companies that we invest in and which markets that they might be able to service in the future.
One of your goals is obviously to invest funds and have a return, but your goal is also, because you're looking for long-term returns, is to catalyze an industry. You want to catalyze much more investment. So what signal do you think that the fuel supply industry needs to trigger broader investment, for other investments to accompany the ones that you're making? What do you think would help that?
I think it's important to have a commitment from end users, but it's likely also going to be very important for each individual product to have the commitment of legislation. When we do green investments and ESG investments, we look to some of the investment frameworks from the European Commissions and others, and there's, I think, still quite a lot of work to be done in order to bring these products to market. As it's not enough to have your technology readiness level sky high. There's a legislation part, there's a scaling part, there's lots of other parts as well, and this is even before, as Berit mentioned before, end users ordering new technologies, in this case the methanol vessels. So it's a complex issue to address.
It certainly is complex, and the goal here is to just demystify a little bit. So I think if we can make progress in that direction, then it's worth having the conversation. But you talked about kind of the regulatory regimes that are really important, and that can be either form of regulation, but it can also be related to certification and other performance criteria. So Carolina, you know, how do we make sure that there are the right measures in place to police the supply of biofuels, to make sure that that they're ready to be scaled up, or that those that are being used are actually scalable? I mean, there's a give and take there where we want to get to certain scales, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have the right safeguards in place. And what does that look like as we get towards scale? Who are the bodies that are going to do that? Is that just RSB, or does it go beyond that into governments?
I think public policies is a key point here, and we have the condition, and we are able to develop feedstock assessment and mapping supply chain, and understand the availability of feedstock that we have to produce biofuels for different sectors, and to attend all of them. And I think public policies is really important at this point to understand what type of mandate it could be established to attend the market, but to produce biofuels or e-fuels or recycled carbon fuels in a sustainable way. I believe we have, I'm a scientist, I'm a biologist, so I believe we have technology, and we have a huge knowledge on how to produce fuels and biofuels, and we have several different types of feedstock, so we can work with biomass, or we can work with recycled carbon, or from fossil carbon and recycled carbon. We can capture CO2 from the atmosphere, so we can do different biofuels and I say advanced fuels from different sources. So we have the capacity to produce the amount to attend and the demand that we have from the sectors. One point that I would like to highlight here is that what we are seeing now, that we have a lot of mandates being discussed or already established for shipping, for aviation. So, but we still don't have the supply of biofuels to attend this market. So this is an important point. And what I suggest here, and what we're seeing that it's happened, it's how we can disconnect or connect the supply with the demand, but disconnect the product, the physical product with the sustainability, the claim of sustainability. And at this point, I believe that book and claim systems could support this transition phase. because the biofuels or advanced fuels could be produced in determined regions, but the demand for these advanced fuels or biofuels could be in another region. So what we can do is to stimulate the production, but disconnecting the product from the claim. So you can sell the claim to your client. You can show that you are supporting a sustainable production of biofuels, just selling the claim of sustainability. So I think booking consistent is really important at this point to create and support the demand.
And so to have essentially just a liquid way of being able to do that, I think that we've seen similar in RECs and the energy markets, renewable energy certificates. I guess the important thing is that you have really the gold standard and the ability that there's the traceability. And so there's probably a role for other technologies in that in terms of blockchain and others to make sure that we're not double counting, because obviously a small accounting error could have a pretty big impact on a forest somewhere.
Yeah.
There was a question about ISO standards that would apply to biofuels. Is that something that you've been looking at the Roundtable?
Sorry, could you repeat, please?
ISO standards, International Standards Organization, whether there's standards now that apply to biofuels, and whether that's something you've looked at. And if not, maybe Berit, I'll take that question to you.
About the defensive fuels and biofuels?
No, sorry. The role of ISO, so the International Standards Organization.
Oh, yes, ISO,
whether they have standards that apply to biofuels now, or whether those will be new standards.
Yes, sorry. Yes, we RSP recognize and of course use the ISO standards in our principles and criteria for sustainability. So some of our requirements, it's based on ISO and the best practice to produce biofuels and biomass, and related to mainly for the GHG emission.
Okay.
And I saw one of the questions mentioned the ISO 8217. I believe this is related to maritime fuels. I don't have this knowledge to talk about this ISO, but maybe some colleagues can talk about it.
Okay. Berit, do you have a comment on the ISO question? Otherwise, I have another question for you.
Not as such. I believe one question one question is about sort of chemical specifications, and there we of course need to make sure that we can use biofuels in our engines, and we also have technical colleagues who are actually working with that. Then of course in terms of sustainability, we think it's very important to do that in a stringent way, and we also use standards such as RSB to do that, and also to do life cycle analysis well to wake on a well-to-wake basis, and also including all greenhouse gases, not only CO2, but also methane and other greenhouse gases.
And there had been a question earlier about the role of Knox and whether that's something, not a greenhouse gas, but obviously a pollutant nevertheless. Is that something that's you're tracking in terms of biofuels, and whether that's something that could be potential impact?
We also have technical colleagues working with this particular, and making sure to be compliant. So of course this is something that that needs to be ensured.
Yeah, and in my understanding, I'm not a chemical engineer, but is that Knox is potentially a bigger issue, Knox and nitrous oxides, on the ammonia side than on the biofuel side, just because there's more unknowns there. There was one question that came up that was asking whether there's a risk of an inefficient two-step process, first to biofuels and then to e-fuels. Wouldn't it be better to plan a one-step transition? And what is the advantage of going via biofuels? Berit, I'll start with you, and then I'm going to ask you, Anne-Sophie, for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can comment on that in terms of methanol. Securing green methanol for our ships. I think we'll need both biomethanol and e-methanol. As I also mentioned previously, we do believe that e-methanol is the more scalable option. and we of course want to get this started, and the and as we have announced for the for the feeder ship in 2023, the fuel will be e-methanol. So but I think both are needed, because in the short and medium term we do believe biomethanol to be more scalable, and also to come at lower costs than e-methanol. So from my side, the short answer would be we need both. But it is, of course, important with stringent sustainability analysis, also in terms of feedstock, in terms of LCA, as I mentioned previously, but also in terms of making sure the feedstocks are sustainable.
Great, thank you. And then, Sophia, how do you prioritize your investments in versus bio as a transition and e-fuels?
I think the end product and its application in an industry is what drives mainly our investments. Of course, over time, you would want to see a development potential, but these vast amounts of fuels that need to be decarbonized kind of necessitate that we work both routes for now. There's a big difference in maturity level for pure play e-fuels at scale as compared to biofuels. And I think that's tricky. Very often these discussions, someone brings up that, you know, good is sometimes the enemy of perfect. I think that doesn't necessarily need to be the case, because the amount of fossil fuels that we're trying to decarbonize are so vast at this point, and there's no guarantee over time for volume, for sustainability, and so on, for trying to pick just one winner. What you usually tend to see in these new technology markets opening up is that from the get-go, a number of different production technology emerges, and over time, one outcompetes the others economically, technically, environmentally, whatever the case may be, usually in a combination. And I expect to see this in the future fuels for maritime shipping as well.
Great, thank you, Anne-Sophie. Johannes, two questions for you. One of them came in through the chat, was asking around traceability of biofuels. Particularly, they were asking about waste-based biofuels, but I suppose there's a traceability of any biofuels. You know, what is it sourcing? You can kind of guarantee it at some point in a port somewhere, but once it goes through a bunkering process and everything else, how are you doing that now, and how might you be doing that in the future?
Yeah, so back in 2018, we at Goodfuels had our first blockchain supply chain biofuel delivery, which meant that from the feedstock supplier until the end user, we had a whole blockchain made. That technology is still in development by us. At the moment, we don't supply all our fuels with it that contain this blockchain technology. So at the moment, we mainly work with the RD compliant certification schemes, provide our customers, of course, a biofuel delivery statement that tells them how much CO2 they reduce compared to their the fossil fuel they would otherwise use. So that's regarding traceability. What we are also looking in, and which in my opinion is super interesting, is that you can also add DNA tracers to feedstocks, and then at the end user can actually trace with a device in their fuel in tank what the percentage or the concentration of the original feedstocks is in their end fuel. So with that, then you can really guarantee that the feedstock ends up eventually in the tank of the customer. So in my opinion, that's also something we can do.
And how much do these add to the cost potentially? Is this something that ends up being negligible on the volumes that we're talking?
It's a couple of 10 euros per ton. So it's not too much, but for the shipping industry, it's somewhat much at the moment. We see that $10 per ton can already be a commercial bottleneck for our customers to use a biofuel.
Thanks. And so maybe that makes me think of one other question, which would be just as we're looking at as the cost of fuels is expected to rise, whether that's going to be from a market-based measure or something else, what does that do to enable kind of new biofuels or new entrants in the biofuels space? So as you know, I know from an energy efficiency perspective, as the cost of fuels is expected to rise, there's a lot of energy efficiency technologies that might be borderline now. What are the biofuels ones that start to kind of come on board, or either the sources or the technologies for biofuels? I'm not sure who wants to, who has some thoughts on that. Maybe Berit, you can start, but maybe Johannes, you can start, and then over to Berit.
So your question is, what biofuels do you see when the prices increase, or
exactly when the price of conventional fuels increases? What are the next biofuels to potentially come on board? So kind of what's that order look like?
Yeah, so if you look at lignocellulosic biomass, you can convert it in bio oils, upgrade that to suitable marine fuels. But those fuels are what we see now slightly more expensive at the moment than biodiesel itself. So it's at the moment commercially not attractive to use those fuels. Of course, no one is producing these fuels on a commercial basis. So once you start up, once they have a chance to actually be bought by the vessel owners, then of course the prices will decrease quite fast, I think, and then they can come much closer to the prices that are closer to the fossil fuels, although we will never get cheaper fuels than the fossil fuels currently out there, but they can come closer. So in my opinion, it will be lignocellulosic fuels that come next.
Great, thank you. Berit, quick comment, and then we'll do a closing round.
Yeah, I would like to make a general comment to that, because I think one of the key issues is that these that the green fuels are more expensive than the fossil fuels, and market-based measure is one way to look at that. And I think another key issue is also reducing the production cost where possible. I mean, working closely to have benefits of technology maturity or scale, also to actually reduce the cost of green fuel, to create this level playing field. I mean, to do everything what is necessary to create that level playing field that we have been discussing.
Excellent, thank you, Berit. So just to close, maybe I'll ask you each, this is a great conversation, very wide-ranging. We covered a broad range of topics. I certainly wouldn't attempt to summarize that, but you know, this was a conversation about future biofuels and the future of biofuels. And so maybe just to close, I'll ask each of you just to complete the sentence. The future of biofuels is what? So maybe we'll go Berit, Carolina, Johannes, and then Anne-Sophie. Berit, the future of biofuels is what?
Yeah, it's that they allow us to take action already in this decade, because we need to take action to bring down CO2 emissions, and biofuels plays an important part in that.
Great, thank you. Carolina?
I think the future of biofuels is a new way to sustain our economy, and the future of biofuels is the future that we want, with sustainability and social development and environment protection. I think the future of biofuels is the biocene. Instead of Anthropocene, is the biocene.
Great, thank you, Caroline. Great word. Johannes, what is the future of biofuels to you?
I think that the future of biofuels is that it can provide a solution for vessel owners in the short term to at least meet the CO2 reduction targets. There will be targets quite soon in the next couple of years, at least in Europe, and biofuels is really an option where you can meet these targets with.
Great, thank you, Johannes. And finally, Anne-Sophie, to you, the future of biofuels is?
Future biofuel is one of many necessary steps in the green transition.
Great, thank you all very much. This has been a really great conversation. We've had a lot of questions in the chat. We didn't probably answer quite all of those, but we've got a lot of different answers that we've come across here. We'll be pulling those together and pulling together a summary of this, not very quickly, but over the coming weeks. We'll make sure that we track all the questions that have been answered. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Carolina Grassi, Berit Hinnemann, Johannes, Schurmann, Anne-Sophie, Vinther, Hansen. Thank you all very much for your contributions today and a lively discussion on biofuels. Thanks all for joining us for our Getting to Zero Coalition webinar on the future of biofuels, and hope to see you all around soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.